Hello, everyone, once again, and once again, welcome to Infinite Discoveries, where we explore world affairs, philosophy, history, the social and behavioral sciences, spirituality, arts, and culture with academics, scholars, activists, and visionaries. As always, we are your three happy hosts, respectively, Rich Grego, Miguel Rodriguez, and Aurobindo Mahapatra. If you want to put further faces to the names, feel free to visit our website, infinitediscoveries.org.
Welcome, everyone, to Infinite Discoveries. I have with me today Dr. Richard Grego, and we have our guest, Reverend Dr. Tracie Barrett. My name is Miguel Rodriguez. Our other colleague, Aurobindo Mahapatra, is not with us today. He's currently at a conference, but he will join us next time. And I want, again, to reintroduce my friend, the Reverend Dr. Tracie Barrett. Her pronouns are she and her, and she lives in Orlando, Florida, with her husband, Richard, and their three cats, Thomas, Rainey, and Stormy. Reverend Tracie considers herself a Unitarian Universalist evangelist, sharing the good news of her liberal and liberating faith. She focuses on each person's journey to spiritual growth, truth, and meaning. While she grew up experiencing many different faith traditions, she says, quote, "When I look back, I believe I was always a Universalist and a Unitarian. Coming home to Unitarian Universalism changed my life," end quote. And she works hard to give that opportunity to everyone. Reverend Tracie received her Master of Divinity in 2017 from Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago, Illinois. While in seminary, she completed 1 unit of chaplaincy internship at Advent Health Hospital and served for 2 years as the student minister at Tri-County Unitarian Universalist in Summerfield, Florida. Tri-County UU ordained her in 2017. She served 3 years as the consulting minister at the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Lake County. She also served the University Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Orlando as contract minister for the last 3 years. She recently completed a Doctor of Ministry at United Theological School, focusing on revitalizing congregations through discipleship. And she's definitely done that at the University Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, where I currently attend. So welcome, Reverend Dr. Tracie, to Infinite Discoveries.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great to have you. Great to have you.
Definitely.
Rich. Yeah. Hey, her husband's name is also Richard.
Yeah, I know.
How's that?
We're just having a domestic conversation. I just, you know what I was thinking would be about interesting way to start off is because we were just prior to this this recording, prior to Miguel hitting the record button, I was asking about sort of to some extent, you know, how radical your journey must have been from one end of the Christian spectrum to the other, in a sense. So maybe that would be a good place to start. How does that happen? Maybe you can't speak in general terms. I don't know if it's more of a personal journey or if you've heard this a lot, but I'm wondering, you know, what do you attribute that to?
Well, I grew up, it was a really interesting situation. I was both unchurched and churched. So my parents did not go to church. They saw no need for it. But somehow at the age of like 4.5, I got sent to church with, you know, neighbors and things like that. So I started out in the Presbyterian church, and I have very few memories of that. I was very young. But I remember the pews, and I remember just the kind of belonging sense. And then one of my friends in elementary school was the pastor's daughter at the United Methodist Church. And so I asked my mom if I could go there. And so she took me there. I was there for probably about 2 or 3 years, confirmed United Methodist, and, you know, really loved it until the minister changed. And the minister that came was not as into the children and the youth. And so some of my friends at school were going to the Nazarene church, and they had a good youth group. So I started going there. And then I ended up over at the Assemblies of God Church, and I'm really not sure how I ended up there, but I did, and threw myself in whole, loved it, was at prayer meetings, was at church Sundays from, 9 a.m. till 2, and then back for Sunday night service. And went to Bible college, went to an Assemblies of God Bible college for 3 years, and had gotten married very young, because that's kind of what you do. And my first husband wanted to be a pastor, and he needed to be married to do that. And so he got married, and we served his father's church as youth pastors for about 18 months. And I loved it. I loved working with the youth. And I always taught them to ask questions and to not just blindly accept authority, and that got me in trouble. Got in trouble a lot in Bible college too, because that's where I now know I was a Unitarian and a Universalist back then, but those were not part of our faith. And so I couldn't have that in my language. And when I got divorced and I left, I joke with people that I broke up with God, and I left the church. I'd seen too much of the backstage, couldn't do it, wandered in the desert type of thing for 10, 15 years, and went to a pagan gathering at the Tampa congregation. And during it, I asked the organizers, I'm like, do they know what you rented this church for? Because we've got like bonfires happening, and do they know? Because I'm pretty sure they wouldn't like this. And he's like, no, we're members here. And I said, well, what church lets pagans be members? Like, that's cool. What's this about? And unfortunately, it didn't work with my schedule to go there, because I was working overnights. And finally, I stumbled my way into a Unitarian Universalist congregation. And I hear from a lot of our new members in every church I've worked in now say, I felt like I came home. And there was just something about the service, about the people. And within a few, probably in my second year there, is when they did a lot of lay speaking, and I was like, oh, I can preach a sermon. I've preached a sermon before when I was 16. I can do this. And so I got up and I preached a sermon, and I did not know that they had recorded all the sermons. I thought they only recorded the minister's sermons. And the minister submitted my sermon into the Florida district competition, and I won. I was like, when I came back to her, I was like, well, wait, so like in lay speaking? She's like, no, I put you up against the ministers in Florida, and you won. And I'm like, oh, well, okay, that's cool. And then she said, do you have a call to ministry? Have you ever had a call? And I was like, yeah, but I got caller ID, and I don't pick up that call anymore when it comes in. I don't want to be a minister anymore. And she's like, okay. And she left it alone. And then the next minister who came in, she must have told her, because every conversation ended with, so why aren't you in seminary? Tell me why you aren't in seminary. And finally she was like, look, just apply. And if you're right, they won't take you. I'll send you to lay leader training. Whatever I can afford to send you to, I'll send you to. She's like, because you're a leader, and I think you're a minister. And so I applied to Meadville, and I got a 50% off scholarship. And I went, oh, I guess I'm going to seminary now, because I'm not going to get in the way of this. And I ended up being able to have that minister as my teaching pastor. So it was fabulous to come full circle in that way.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Amazing. There's a million places I wanted to stop you, because I had no idea it was that interesting, the journey. There's a lot, and also that there's such a thing as a sermon competition that people actually do. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I did one when I was a teenager for the top Nazarene talent, and that's
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So okay, so then I still didn't get that. So I mean, it sounds like you've been literally all over the map as far as almost spirituality goes, really Western spirituality anyway, right? Because I mean, from Assemblies of God to nothing, or I don't know what that was. And
yeah,
then
it was a seeking time. Yeah, it was definitely a time of seeking. I got to take a really interesting course at University of South Florida on comedy and tragedy and religion. And we talked about which religions fit in comedy or tragedy in like the Greek sense.
Oh, really?
So it was kind of like a really interesting world religions survey course. And I kept studying after that, because it was like, okay, I'm missing something. I know I'm missing something. I'm wandering. I need somewhere to call home spiritually.
Wow.
And it was, I mean, I researched them all. I looked into Hinduism, I looked into Buddhism, I mean, I was reading everything I could find. And, I did the belief net test that everybody.
Yeah, give that to my.
It was like, you're
used to-
Unitarian Universalist. I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know what that means. And
Fascinating.
no, I'm
Yeah.
not. I don't think I am. And I don't
Yeah.
know what they are. So I don't,
Yeah.
and then, because I was always in my beliefs, Unitarian and Universalist,
Yeah.
it seemed like a really good fit. And it allows me that pluralism to be able to pick up from my different traditions that have helped me get where I am.
Mhm.
So it's definitely still home.
Mhm.
It will probably
Yeah.
always be home.
Yeah.
I have a lot of respect for a lot of the other denominations.
Yeah.
My doctorate is through a United Methodist school, so I got to kind of touch that
Oh, is that a United
that childhood feeling again, and
Yeah.
that healed a lot. It was really good to kind of go in and say,
Mhm.
okay, yes, this was something that was helpful to me. It wasn't this that hurt, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And because those kinds of journeys come with religious trauma, and I've worked through that, but
Mm.
not everybody does. And that's the hard thing.
Fascinating. So the one, again, more questions now. First of all, religious trauma is a fascinating concept. But before that, so the thing that sort of the thread that maybe unites, that runs through all the experiences you had. Well, I shouldn't guess. What was it? What was that? What kept you going to search and search and search through all those different faiths and then finally come to rest? What was that persistent theme?
I think it was both community, because when I
Yeah.
was in my kind of wandering, I would want to go visit a church at Christmas or at Easter, right? And touch on those big rituals that are communal.
Yeah.
And just, so needing that community, and also needing that connection with something bigger, right? I consider myself a theist, but I also call it the big mystery. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we're all wrong, and that's fine, but it gives us comfort, and that's okay. And so for me, this great mystery is more of a, cheering me on. Like, it's not a bang you on the head kind of God. Like, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in a God that punishes.
Yeah.
But I believe that there is something bigger than us.
Yeah.
That, the fact that we have the same elements as stars, in our bodies, that's really cool to me. So there's something bigger, and I don't know what it is, but I kept wanting to find a way to connect to it in a very personal way. My spiritual relationships with the divine have always been very personal.
Yeah.
And, just kind of, and I would joke that, well, yeah, I pray because I'm always kind of having a conversation in my head to whatever there is. And sometimes that conversation is, why is this happening? And what, are you serious? Why are these people, how can they be still made in your image? And I know I have to respect and, love them, but whew, some of them are hard. Like, some of it really challenges me. And some of it I just go, well, that's just a lesson on how not to behave. That's what I have to tell myself.
Yeah, I so much of what you say resonates with me personally. I guess that's why I'm very comfortable anyway in Unitarian Universalist churches. So I guess what you're saying, what you say recalls for me sort of the ideas, that I read in some of the more theistic existentialists, say like a Kierkegaard or Gabriel Marcel I believe, talked about the mystery is what sort of his sort of, if in translation, term for God. I guess so there was so on a daily basis, you still felt the presence of something larger. And did you pray? Was it that kind of was it that personal and that immediate? However you interpret prayer, that's a profound theme too, I guess, right?
Yeah. And so, like, when I was in Bible college, my favorite way to pray was I had a journal, and I would just go up to the chapel and I would just sit and write my prayers. And then if I felt anything, sensed anything, had an answer kind of thing. You know, it wasn't like a hearing somebody
Yeah.
outside, but it would be
Yeah.
kind of like our internal voices do anyway.
Yeah.
And I would put that in parentheses, as that would be like, okay, maybe that's a message. And I would just keep going and then
Really?
read through it. And there were nights I sat up there and did 4 or 5 pages worth of
Fascinating.
journaling. And so that's kind of always been the thing, you know, like I've never been one who's big on now it's time to sit down and pray. We're going to have a prayer meeting. Like I
Yeah.
hated meetings, but I
Yeah.
went to them, but I hated them
Yeah.
because they were long and, you know, but for me, it's always been you know, if a friend says, oh, I've got this going on, I will, you know, think about them and, you know, kind of send them my love and then do whatever practical things I can do. Right. But I don't believe that like prayer is this magical, I'm going to ask all of these things and then these things are going to come to me. For me, it's more of like a centering with a conversation, right? So I'm centering to get myself in a good space to deal with this, but I'm also having a conversation with whatever could be there that could, you know, help me be in the space I need to be in to deal with the situation. Yeah. And I
So
joke.
sort of, no, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So my doctoral focus group was on breakthrough prayer, which they, you know, they talked about praying dangerous prayers, which I've said I've always done, because when I submitted for anything for school or whatever, I would always just say, okay, if this is the one it's supposed to be, make the path clear, and the path would be like crystal clear. And I joked that this was a group that you have to be very careful about what you're asking them to pray for. Because while I was up for intensives, my mother-in-law was really sick. She'd passed out. They rushed her to the hospital. She's in her 90s. And, you know, my husband called me in a frantic, and I like gasped when I saw his text message, and everybody's like, what? And so I told them, and right then they prayed. And by the time she got to the hospital, there was no stroke, no heart attack, no nothing. And I'm like, I don't know if y'all had something to do with that, but I'm gonna be real careful about what I ask for. Not to pray for, just in case you guys got like a secret special line to the divine that I'm not aware of. You know, but and at the same time, I felt great comfort in that group surrounding me to pray for someone who's very dear to me and to pray for me, because I was, you know, stuck in Ohio and they were in Florida and there was no way I could get to them before last week.
Prayer, I'm sorry. Yeah. So prayer is sort of like the, rather than being any kind of a ritual or an importuning to some force, it's more an expression of the immediacy of an encounter, living encounter with the transcendent or the cosmic or whatever you want to call that. Or God, if you're comfortable with God talk, as so many people aren't. I almost try to avoid that sometimes. It comes with so much baggage for so many people that, you know.
It gets me in trouble.
So that's sort of what it, and then when you, back to this notion, I'm sorry, I'm throwing these questions at you. Saying so many fascinating things.
This is great. I'm following every rabbit trail you're going.
Okay. It's just so fascinating. You're evoking so many really fascinating insights. Then I guess when you describe religious trauma, what you were talking about, are those the points of sort of being lost that you felt? I don't know if that's the right, I'm putting these words out, but
no, for a lot of people, and for me, my religious trauma came out of the fact that my first husband was abusive and his father knew about it and allowed him to still be on the platform and did not discipline his son. Instead, his mom came to me to talk to me about being a better wife. And it was wrapped up in God language and it was wrapped up in the Bible. And so those types of things, or clergy misconduct to people, you know, those people have definite religious trauma. And some of it is, you know, the scriptures have been used for so many years as a hammer to bang on people. And that causes trauma. Like there are people who will never step foot in the doors of a church because of how that was pushed on them. And so my hope is always to make a space where you can come with your trauma. You know, please don't spread it on everybody else, but let's work through it if we can. But you are safe here to have those, you know, deconstruction kind of things. Because some of it too is, you know, when I started to deconstruct, it was, oh my God, I don't think I believe this. And then I'm sitting in that church going, I'm going to lose my entire community
Yeah.
if I say I no longer believe this.
Mm.
And so that's a lot. And that is one of the big things that a lot of people struggle with on like your surface level religious trauma is that, okay, but if I leave,
Lose the community. Yeah.
and and there were many years during my kind of wandering in the desert that I was like, if they're right,
Mm.
I'm going to hell.
Mm.
Because I grew up during the time of the Left Behind series, and we would
Yeah.
and we would watch the scary movies, and it was all the whole thing. So that gets like built into you. If you do something wrong, you're going to burn in hell.
Yeah.
And I couldn't reconcile that with the relationship I had with the divine and with what I was reading in my Bible, because I was kind of always a scholar. Like I was always like, well, wait, that doesn't make sense. Let me look up what that actually means and things like that. And so I think, we don't talk about it enough, that people just then carry it around and then come into congregations, especially UU congregations, and go, well, I don't like that because of this, right? And here's all my trauma I'm going to dump on you. And it's like, well, wait, no, I'm not like that. Let's talk about your deconstruction. I'm all for that. I don't think you're going to go to hell. I don't believe in hell. So it's difficult. And it's one of the things that, I want everybody to have space to heal from that. And there's different modalities to do that. In some cases, it does require therapy. In my case, it required therapy.
Did it really?
And
Why? I mean, and
because of the abuse. Yeah, the abuse and being told
abuse, you mean that literal psychological abuse within the context of the theology of what you were practicing, really? And that's at the Assemblies of God Church, are you saying? Really?
Yep. My role was to be, the perfect wife, be a mother, be my husband. And he wasn't a good husband. Yeah, I mean, we were young too. Like I look back now and go, we were young. We were 19 and 20. We didn't know what we were doing. We shouldn't have ever gotten married. But the fact that the church and his parents condoned it and then facilitated it, every altar call on Sunday morning, my mother-in-law would come off the piano, grab me and take me up to the altar to pray. And, and so it was this constant, you're not a good wife, you're not a good Christian, you're not the, and so that required some therapy in with the abuse to go, okay, that wasn't God. I can separate that out. That was not how this should be. And so then if that's separated out, then what do I have left? And then what am I going to pick up the pieces from? Because one of my classmates in seminary said, I love being a UU, but sometimes I just miss that going down to the altar and just threshing it out with God and people surrounding you to help you pray through that. And I was like, oh yeah, I kind of miss that too. Like that there was something communal response to something very heavy is on your heart. We don't need to know what it is. We're just going to be here with you and sit with you. And that kind of stuff, there's that longing.
Is there? Yeah. And I can see where coming from a UU tradition that there's not a lot of space for that.
We don't do that.
Yeah. The interesting thing you're saying, and again, Miguel, break in anytime if I'm hogging the question. This is just too interesting to let up on. Yeah, I just one other thing. It sounds as though then, as far as your personal journey goes, it reminds me anyway, a lot of what you're saying of what I hear, because I teach world religions a lot. I did. I actually haven't for several semesters now, but I get a lot of students with experiences that recall what you're saying in very evangelical churches, and so many of the really staunch, rabid, secular, humanist, atheist types were formerly, who hate religion, were formerly, and I guess that's religious trauma, that's their way of dealing with religious trauma, perhaps. Is that
I mean, that's what I have found is the very, very militant, like will tell other people that what they believe is stupid, that kind of person. Typically, if you start to kind of dig, has had an experience in mostly evangelical tradition, and it's really easy to swing that way. I think I spent about 6 months on God's real. I don't believe in God, and I just kind of sat going, but wait, no, I think I still do. Like, I can't, it was just kind of like sweet nudging going,
Yeah.
okay, you can do that for a little bit, but I'm gonna show back up. And
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
and so I try to be, it's hard because I've been victim of the militant atheist and
Yeah.
humanist. And so I try to just understand where they're coming from and go, okay, that's cool. That's what you believe. And we live, we're all human and we're all different and we all can believe different things. And that's okay as long as we're not hurting each other. But if your beliefs start to trample my personal freedoms, or your beliefs start to, make people cry because you're being so mean, then that's a problem. You've caused
Yeah.
pain. And now we have to deal with that part of it, that you've now caused pain.
Yeah.
And, I remember I had a friend at my first UU church who was a humanist. And I asked him one day, I'm like, so why are you even here? Like, why are you
Yeah.
at a church then?
Yeah.
And he just looked at me, he's like, because I still want community.
That's interesting. I was going to ask you, that was going to be another follow-up question I
Mm-hmm.
had for you. It occurred to me as you were talking, because at UU congregations, I encounter a lot of secular humanist types. And that I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but that, that umbrella term of the people who think that way. And I've thought that myself. I've wondered that myself. And I noticed that I read this fascinating article. I used it. I actually cited it in one of my own at one point, by a guy who was a clinical psychiatrist, who was talking. There was a project. It was called the Fundamentalist Project. There was this huge thing that was undertaken they must have gotten a huge grant for it at the University of Chicago. It was a cross-disciplinary thing where they looked at sort of a lot of things, among which was sort of the psychology behind religious fundamentalist beliefs. And this psychologist in this article traced, using the criteria that the Chicago University project was using, the similarities between extreme, you want to call it that, again, these are sort of incendiary terms, but extreme fundamentalist Christian views and extreme, if you want to call it that, fundamentalist atheist secular humanist views, and found that they were very, very much, in many respects, at least psychologically, mirror images of one another, which, of course, if you asked either side, they completely reject that idea that we're anything like them. I don't know if you encountered that in your congregations at all. I don't know.
Yeah, I've seen that. And there was one Sunday, because I got tired of hearing about, well, you need to cut out all this God language because it's just, we're all secular humanists or religious humanists, but we're all humanists. I said, okay, well, let's see. And so I had everybody, I did a lot of, do you like this or this? Are you from the North or the South? Those kinds of things. And then I finally said, okay, we're gonna do a new one. I'm gonna have you stand up. And if on this side of the building is you believe that there is a God, absolutely. You don't have to define it, however you define it, but you believe there's God. That side, I want you atheists, no God whatsoever, then spread yourself out accordingly. And we had a perfect bell curve. And I said,
how did the curve go?
So it was, everybody was we had a few people on each end, but most people were there in the center of, I'm not really sure. There might be a God, there might not. There might be more agnostic, I would put it in that, and I was like, okay, so, and we had more people on the side for, I believe in God in some way than we did the no God at all. And so I just want you to look around. Just want you to look around. So the next worship team meeting, I went, again, we are all humanists here because we're not. And that's why I preach the way I preach. And I try to hold that in my head all the time, because a lot of times in UU congregations, you'll get people who are spiritual, who are Christians even, and come to UU congregations, and they will say, like, I've had people cry at an Easter service because I preached on Jesus. And they're like, thank you. We haven't heard that in years. I don't get to experience that. I can't express myself because of that. And that tends to happen if there's a lot of the more militant, it kind of quiets the rest of the people down.
Do
And it's
they
a real,
tend to be the most, and I get, sorry to interrupt, but the
in
secular
Florida,
humanist branch tend to be the most militant of the?
in Florida, we've got a lot of humanist agnostic atheists. Like, kind
Interesting, in Florida.
and so in the Florida congregations. And so that tends to skew what happens in the congregation,
I bet,
right?
yeah, yeah.
You know, King's Chapel, which is, you know, one of our oldest congregations up in, I don't remember now, it's in my thesis, but I don't remember now, is decidedly a Christian
Mm,
congregation. They still do communion. They use the Book of Common Prayer. They
really?
are reaching into those roots.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are people who go there and they're like, why is there a cross up there? And they're like,
Yeah.
because this is who you
Yeah.
are, and you're
Yeah.
welcome to stay.
Yeah.
I understand if this isn't right for you. And it's really,
Yeah.
it's been interesting to watch the little affiliate groups that are within the UUA. You know,
Yeah.
there's the Unitarian Universalist Christians, we have UU Jews, we have
Yeah.
UU
Yeah.
pagans, we have, you know,
Right.
we have all of these groups.
Yeah.
And what I think happens is these other groups are the ones that don't have as much money and don't have as much volunteer time. And
Interesting.
therefore, then what happens is you get the people who have the money and the people who have the time to volunteer making all the decisions. And that's what
Wow.
shapes the congregation.
That's a fascinating insight about, yeah, I always thought the UU churches would be above all that kind of stuff, but I
You
guess.
would think, and that's a conversation in some of my ecumenical groups is
Yeah.
because they're like, well, you know, this is where we're at with this. And I'm like, yeah, and then we've got this. And my
Wow.
peer associate had turned to me one day and he was like, if y'all don't have it together, there's no hope for the rest of us. And I'm like, the shoemaker's kids, man, we ain't got no shoes. That's just what it is. We will do all this great work out there, but we still have some work in here to do.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
interesting.
and I think that's true of everybody.
I'm
And,
sure. Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, like it's one of those things they can't really push us up on a pedestal because we don't. We're still out there working it out every day too. And but I think what's different is in a UU congregation that's expected.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
we are non-creedal. And
That's
so
why
we
people
don't
go.
tell you, right? We
Yeah.
don't tell you what to believe. And I
Right.
always say, I'm here not to give you answers. I'm just here to ask you questions so that you get the answers.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to ask you why a lot. And
Mhm.
why is that important to you? And why is that not important to you? And what's, you know, what brings joy in your life? And, you know, how do you function out in the world? What drives you in that?
One more quick thought, then I promise Miguel I'll shut up and ask all the
Yeah,
questions.
I can't wait to jump in. I can't wait.
Just one thing, just again.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, just from what just another question inspired by something this other venue that we just took off on in the conversation. Do you find that because you mentioned the regional differences, which I thought was fascinating between Florida and say more traditional was that up in New England?
Yeah, New England will still
Yeah.
have like box pews and all of that,
which
and
makes sense.
have way more authority. Yeah.
Because I was wondering about, and I bet there's been research done on this kind of thing, but I was wondering about, like, I know, for instance, I guess they call it, they don't have creeds, you have covenants, sometimes they refer to them. In say the Philippines, I guess there's a relatively large, as the world goes,
Yeah.
community. And I noticed that their covenant includes literal reference to God and thanking or believing in God, and I believe that God is love, which I like. But again, you wouldn't find that, I would assume, in any of the American
It depends.
churches. Really?
Yeah, it depends. So the God is love phrase, it comes from our Universalist heritage.
Yeah.
And so that a lot of, you know, the Philippines tend to skew a little more Christian in their UU congregations.
Yeah.
And so like New England, totally different from, say, the Pacific Northwest.
That's what I was going to ask you about.
Texas or Florida. You know, Texas and
How does
Florida
that work then? And why, for instance, why in the world would Florida and the Deep South be such a secular humanist constituency?
My theory is because down here in the South, like the second question somebody asks you is, where do you go to church? Right.
Yeah.
And so I know from my home congregation, they formed first as an ethical society to have conversations and all that. And then they needed to be a church, so they aligned with the UUA and joined them. And, for them, it was, we needed a place to go on Sundays. And so when a lot of people, and we get a lot of transplants down south. And so when people who were up north come down south and then they find, a congregation, typically it's still the humanists and the atheists that come in. And that's great. I'm glad we have this space for them. My issue is when they take over from what other people in the congregation and don't want to hear what other people in the congregation believe. I have colleagues who have had congregants count how many times they use the word God in a sermon and will come and say something because you use no problem telling you what they think about your sermon. I've experienced that. And it's, and so but it's an interesting, that's my theory, is that because in the South, you have to know, where do you go to church? And I'll say, oh yeah, I'll go over here to the UU church. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're gonna have people, constantly badgering you to come to their church, right? And so I suspect that's part of it, that Southern, part of it. Whereas up north, it's more, this is where we grew up, this is where our church is, and there's more church congregations up north, right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
There's on every town corner in New England, there's a UU congregation because they were there when those cities got founded. And down here, we're so far apart and separated. And a lot of the UU congregations down here came out of either the first wave of the fellowship movement when the Unitarians were working to find places to put congregations. And then the kind of second wave that came in the 80s and 90s, where these groups, either left another congregation or were like, hey, there's no UU congregation here, let's start one. And so I call that kind of the second wave fellowship movement, because there wasn't a district or national leader person in the office going, here's how you do it. And so there's a lot of, well, we just started and this is what our bylaws say. And so but you don't see that as much up north. I have a very dear friend who is a minister in New Hampshire, and their congregations have pews still in some of the, one of the ones she worked in had the box pews with the little doors and the there's thing that way up high that I got to climb up into, and had we call it the clergy killer because it's that flat thing right above. You're like, if that thing falls, it's held by a chain. If that falls, I'm dead. That's all there is. But it's really interesting to me, and that's probably one of my rabbit holes that I had to put in a folder when I was doing my thesis. Of that's not the topic of your thesis. You can't go down those rabbit holes yet. But it's something I'm interested in studying, is the makeup demographically around the country. Because I think it's a lot more about the area. So I think Texas has a lot of the same issues, because Texas again is one of those states. Where do you go to church? So.
Where do you feel most at home in what kind of region and what kind of church?
I mean, I've grown up in Florida. I've been in Florida since I was 4 years old. So I don't know any other state really. But I've been in the bigger congregations, when I would go to school in Chicago, we'd go visit, First UU in Chicago is where we graduated from, and it's like Gothic cathedral style, and that evokes that sense of spiritual to me a lot more. I think that's probably a place I would feel at home in. Here's our main room, and we're going to move the chairs, and now it's now it's church time, and now it's social hour time, and those I don't feel as spiritually, grounded in. I was very lucky in my first ministry after seminary. They had just built a building, and so they built this beautiful sanctuary, and we had chairs still, but it was just this soaring ceiling with windows that we got stained glass put in, and that felt very like I would go into the office and just sit in the sanctuary and do that, because it just felt that peacefulness. And it's hard. That's what I'm looking for. And there's not a lot of places like that in Florida. There are a few of the older congregations. First Unitarian is an older congregation. They have the pews and the sanctuary in it.
Where are they? Where's that located?
They're in downtown Orlando. So on Robinson.
I see.
Mhm.
Fascinating. All right.
They were founded like in the 1900s, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Ah, maybe not.
And then our congregation came out of there.
Oh, okay.
People were further in Orlando, over in East Orlando, and wanted to form
Hmm.
something. So that's where they came out of.
Fascinating. Okay, Miguel, I won't, I ran away with this talk. I'm sorry. If you jump right in, I feel like I'm hogging the whole conversation. Sorry.
Didn't I tell you she'd be so interesting
Oh,
to talk
yeah.
with?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it's
Absolutely.
amazing.
Yeah.
You know, you and I are both like kids in a candy store. We want
Yeah.
we want it. We want it. Yeah. Um, my question for you, Reverend Doctor, is, as you know, the current state of religion, Christianity in particular in the United States, it's really awkward recently, right?
Mhm.
So, what do you see the challenges for both the UU and, well, I guess, religion at large in the United States?
Yeah.
What do you see the challenges are?
There's a lot of reckonings happening. I watched the United Methodist split happen in real time in school. It was a Methodist school. I had cohort members that went Global Methodist, cohort members that stayed in United Methodist, and it was painful to watch. Like, we don't,
What was that over? I'm not sorry to interrupt.
LGBTQ rights,
Oh,
the
was it?
LGBTQ and
Similar
the
to
right
the
against
Episcopal?
this. Yeah,
Yeah.
for them to serve, for them to be ordained as ministers.
Yeah.
And for same-sex marriage. And I think some places could do same-sex marriage, but there wasn't like a lot of openly gay ministers because they weren't, and that was happening in different regions because they're split
Yeah.
up that way. And some regions would okay it and put them ordination. Last year in Florida, they didn't do any ordinations for United Methodist clergy because there were some LGBTQ in the grouping. So they just said, none of you get to go through, which I thought was rude. But that's the reckoning they're having. And a lot of different denominations have been doing that work. I'm in an affirming leaders network of ecumenical ministers. And, we have representatives from the Episcopal Church, the Lutheran Church, the Methodist Church, Presbyterian. They're all doing this work of, we were wrong in this information and how we translated in the Bible. And now that we know better, because scholars have said, here's what the real thing is, now they're going through and reckoning with that. And so I think that's happening a lot in the other denominations. And for UUs, it's, we also are reckoning with that. There are people who are uncomfortable with it. They'll say, oh yeah, okay, we're fine with LGBTQ people, blah, blah, blah. But then if they get an openly gay or trans minister, those ministries have not gone well. A lot of microaggressions, some macroaggressions. Yeah, it's heartbreaking because you're like, we should be above this.
Yeah.
And same for ministers of color. There have been so many problems with race. So diversity is a big thing. As Unitarian Universalism is getting more diverse, there is that reckoning with the very staunch, my friends and I call them OWGs, old white guys, no offense, but that's where a lot of the struggle comes from, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And, I've heard things like, why do we have so many women ministers?
It's amazing.
From a UU. And I was like, I'm standing right in front of you. Like, what? 50%. It's 50%. When they just did the male-female split, it was about 50%. And so I'm like, well, come on, we've been, Universalists ordained the first woman minister. So like, that's just who we always have been. And I think as we wrestle with that, and that's wrapped in the changing of our language of who we say we are. We have a big vote coming up next month at our General Assembly about accepting new language for what's called Article 2, which is in our bylaws, and it states our principles and our purpose. So this is where the 7 principles that guide UUs come from. And we're supposed to look at it and change it every 10 to 15 years. And we haven't changed it since 1985. So for newer UUs, newer, 85 and up, that's the only thing they've ever known. So this change in language, original language is still in it. It's just a shifting and saying love is at the center of what we do. Love is what fuels us. Love should always be the frame in which we do our work. And then here are our values that we ascribe and covenant to do out in the world. And I think because there's more action language in it, and there's more, hey, this is actually pretty easy if you're working on these smaller things in your own circle. Change is scary, change is hard. And those two things of the diversity of Unitarian Universalism and Unitarian Universalism ministry, and this change in language is just causing this consternation. And they're saying it's all about the change in the language because there's a group that's fueling the dissatisfaction because they've been dissatisfied with the diversity happening. And so they're wrapping it up together. And, I'm not looking forward to General Assembly, but I'm hopeful that the language will go through and that we can then start fixing the rest of the issues. But it's definitely gonna be hard. And I wrote my thesis on the fact that a lot of Unitarian Universalists don't know what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. Like they just go, oh, this fits. I took the belief net test. This is where I can be. They let humanists in. I can be here, but they don't really know what it means. Like, it's not an easy tradition. There are days, I'm not going to lie, that I wish I was back in a fundamentalist church where they told me what to believe and told me what to think, because that's comforting. Like, there's a reason people flock to it. It's hard being a UU, I have to look at everything I do in the lens of love and justice. And that calls me to do work that's not comfortable, and to call out things when they're not right, and to seek justice. And it's definitely something I really feel, if people had a firmer grounding, which is what my project was, and it was a discipleship class for 6 weeks. If they had that grounding, they would then be like, oh, now I understand. Now I can go tell people about who we are, because we're dying out as a denomination.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we have been losing churches at an astounding rate. We are now down to, when I pulled my numbers for my defense, in my paper, I had the numbers from 2021, and we were at 968 congregations, or no, 1,016 congregations, less than what we had when we merged. And when I pulled the numbers for my defense, we were at 968 congregations.
That's interesting. I get why the mainstream, Christian denominations are losing a constituency, but I don't know why. I was under this strange delusion that you guys would be thriving.
We're there too. We're right there too. And that's the thing that nobody thinks about, is like, we have the same issues. And if you take theology aside and look at what the issues are that are causing the decline in church, it's the same thing. We lose, I think it's something like 45% of our youth every year. They bridge that when they go into the adult part of the congregation. And because youth group is so different than the main congregation, in youth groups, they're comfortable talking about spirituality. They do this kind of work about what is my theology. They've grown up in, here's what we say we, work for. And this is what we say we're going to do. And we're going to be this type of people. And then they hit the main congregation and they're like,
really?
Why aren't we talking about this? Because that humanist, and I've got great, love humanists. Like, I love religious naturalism. I was in there for a little while. Like, I kind of float all around that spectrum.
Yeah.
But the more staunch and militant atheists and humanists shut that down in those kids. And so they leave. And where they end up going is to the mega churches. That's why the mega churches are thriving.
Yeah.
Because it's emotional experience. Which, no shade on the musicians. They're trained to do that. There's a technique in how they do worship. For the music. You get them all built up and get them all energized, and then you do the chord change and you bring them down slower, and then you do something kind of sad, and then they're ready to pray and do whatever.
Yeah.
And the kids are able to translate, right, the theology, and usually mega churches are nice, soft theology. They don't push hard. A lot of them. They do the fundamentalist, you're going to burn in hell. They'll just do about how to live better and how to do all this. So that's why they're thriving, because kids from all denominations are going, I want an emotional, spiritual experience.
Yeah, that I get. Yeah.
And so I'm going to go there.
I'm just surprised they come from a UU background.
Some of them do.
Because it does come across in the mega churches as very evangelical, in a very conservative sort of sense. At least it always did to me, right? I mean, and
some of these newer ones don't. They're more in that, like, happy
Really?
feeling, how do you feel? And then they put you in small groups and you're working with all these other people. And, the problem is in the past, our youth would come back when they had children because they wanted to raise their children the way they were raised in the
Yeah.
UU.
Right.
But the thing I discovered in my research was, okay, that's great. And we've relied on that. We've not done anything else. We just go, they'll come back when they have kids.
Yeah.
These young generations are already saying they're not going to have children.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if they're not having children,
Hmm.
we're never going to get them back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what we're now starting to see those numbers for. And as older members are dying off,
Hmm.
we're getting to that point of we're going to have, we're in trouble, and that's
Yeah.
why I joked with my friends that I was like the Martin Luther of the UUA with this thesis.
Yeah.
I feel like I have these things I want to discuss with y'all. Can we have a conversation about how we fix this problem? I
Hmm.
don't want to do the UUA. I don't want to change it. I just want to fix it.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and that's the hard part is, how do we do that? And that's the next step, I guess.
Fascinating. Do you think that, do you have any, again, Miguel, I'm sorry, I'm doing it again.
No, go ahead, please. It's fascinating.
Do you have any sense of, broader sense of how, because really, when you talk about Christian, religious practice in the United States, it's largely Christian. But did you have any sense of, and not just the United States, really in the West, because that United States is much more religious, of course, right, than Europe and everything. But and they're declining even faster in the mainstream churches. But do you have any sense in which you think religion is evolving, religious expression, I guess, and spirituality is evolving? Because I wonder sometimes, obviously there's a growth in evangelical churches for the reasons you gave, but I'm also wondering if that spirituality isn't being channeled off into modes of expression that we don't even count as religious expression yet, maybe, and that kind of thing. Do you find that that's the case?
Yeah, I mean, as the Pew report comes out and says we've got so many, the majority are spiritual but not religious, right?
Yeah.
And what I mean by that typically is I feel like there's a sense of something, and I'm spiritual, like I believe there's something bigger than me.
Yeah.
Church sucks, and I don't want to go there,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
They don't want the religion part, which is the rules and the dogma and the creeds and all of that.
Yeah.
And we as Unitarian Universalists do a really crappy job of telling people who we are. We just do. Like,
Really?
There's commercials for all these other congregations, right? All these other denominations have commercials, national commercials, when and people go into doors. And I don't like, that was the one thing I hated doing, was door-to-door evangelism, and I refused to do it. But still.
Yeah.
And I think there's more we could do to say, because you would think, okay, if say 49% of people are spiritual but not religious, then they should be in UU congregation, right?
Yeah, you'd think they'd be attracted to it.
But they're not coming.
Yeah.
And I had 5 people tell me the other day they have driven past our congregation multiple times and didn't know who we were and didn't know where we were. Or people would be like, oh, I heard there was somebody in East Orlando, but I don't know where they are.
Yeah.
And I mean, I had where I grew up, in the counties as big as Rhode Island, and we had one tiny UU congregation, and so it becomes a sense of, I think personally, down here in the South, we should be like what's up north and have one in every town. And I think overall, and this is happening in all denominations, the generations now don't want to just sit and consume content for an hour on Sunday morning. They don't have time for that. They can consume content whenever they want, right? They have a phone, they have TikTok, they can do whatever.
Right.
And coming in and sitting to do that, and then there really not being anything else that helps them, there's these groups, and there's this group, and there's this committee. That's not what they need, right? And I think because that's missing, they're not coming. And that's for us, that's for the Methodists, the Lutherans, the whole 9 yards. It's a change in the generational aspect. And a lot of people, when you say, oh, well, young adults, they go millennials. I'm like, well, millennials are no longer young adults, my friends. They're 30s and 40s now.
Right.
Okay? So when we talk about young adults, we're talking about the not the millennials, Gen Z, we're talking about Gen Alpha. They are completely different. than we've ever seen before.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're very in touch with what they believe, in who they are, and what their individual purpose in life is, and what they want out of life. And I think we have to find a way to meet them where they are. And that's not going to be inside a church building. And that's for all the denominations. I really think in the next 20 years, we're going to see a change from, you know, this church on this block that everybody goes to because we grew up here in this town, to, hey, this church, and I know of a church who meets at a brewery every Sunday morning, you know, and they're Lutheran. I'm actually going to go check them out on my next Sunday off because it's walking distance from where I live. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to have church in a brewery. That sounds cool.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. The church plants and the denominations that pay for and provides grant money for ministers to do church plants in areas are planting them in places like breweries, coffee shops, those because the third place, right? Home, work, and the third place is no longer church. And our churches don't know that, or they do and they ignore it. They think that because this has always been the third place, but it's not anymore. It's not where people are gathering, and we've got to go to where they're gathering.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I really think in about 20 years, you're going to see that change to it being third place, not being church.
Wow. I wonder if, you know, I always used to say this, and Miguel actually, and we've talked about it, and we've talked about it on the show and just personally about how, to some extent, I wonder, because I find, you know, at least, you know, and this is just my own anecdotal experience with students. I guess I read Pew Reports and I get that same sense from them, is that younger, you know, young students are starving for something. They're starving for, we're just a very meaningless, purposefulness starved world, right? And you sense that in young people, and they come into world religions class very curious because of that. But like you said, nothing seems to really attract them from what they see out there. And with Unitarian Universalism, it seems to me that would really appeal to, because that's exactly the place for somebody to go who is on a spiritual quest, because it's a ground zero for you to explore everything.
Right.
But like you
what
said,
I tell the students at market, I'm like, we are a place for you to deconstruct and reconstruct and deconstruct again, because I do it all the time. I am constantly reconstructing and deconstructing. And
the thing is, though, you know, I wonder, is it that, because like Miguel and I, we very often talk on the show when we talk about political issues, that if you look at the conservatives versus the left in the United States, and even, I suppose, if you want to equate them, the Republican Party versus the Democratic Party, the left seems to be so much more of a big tent, right? Because that's part of their ethos, is being accepting, being inclusive, being tolerant, right? And whereas, again, the right, just sort of almost by its very identity, tends to be, this is where we stand, and that's it, and there's no compromise. And to some extent, despite all the disadvantages of that, at least for people who are seeking, here's somebody who knows where they stand. Whereas if you go to a place, again, whether it's politics or religion, I suppose, where everybody's like, well, you know, we believe in everything, right? Everybody's included. We love everyone just the way you are. I guess it might be tougher for a person starting from that vantage point. And boy, I guess you've experienced this in your life. It might be tougher for a person starting from that vantage point to really struggle to where they need to go. Do you think that has to do with it?
Yeah, and I think it ties into with economics. You know, if you're worrying about how you're going to pay your rent and how you're going to feed yourself this week, you don't have the mental space to contemplate, you know, how do we make things larger and more inclusive? Being told what to do is comforting, right? There's structure. When there's structure and there's chaos in your life, but you have a structure here, that's appealing. And I think that's one of the big shifts Unitarian Universalism is beginning to reckon with. We've done some reports on it, of the economics are changing in our congregations. We are no longer the rich white, you know, upper middle class people. You know, we have people in our congregations who, you know, don't have cars, who are struggling, who are making it a day at a time. And that's not always seen And so it's all a lot of, oh, well, we're going to do this thing and we're going to, tickets are only $200. You can do that. And I'm like, that's my grocery bill for the week.
Yeah.
I can't do that. And so I think we need to look at like all of it. And so I think economics play a role. And also let's remember this younger generation, they're the lockdown generations. They've
Right.
grown up with chaos within the school and having to learn how to, every day you come to school might be your last,
Right.
and so they're having existential crises.
Yeah.
Like last year, and I get to do it again this year, I worked as a chaplain at one of our youth camps, one of our UU youth camps out in Wisconsin, Wyoming, the other W one. And I went in thinking chaplaining is going to be easy. It's going to be a little bit of homesickness, a little bit, I don't get along with my cabin mate. No, these kids crushed my heart because they were dealing with, I've come out, my mom's not happy about it, and I don't know what I'm going to do. Or, I don't have money to go to college, and my parents are expecting me to go to college and get out of the house. And I mean, those are the things they're dealing with. And we've instilled so much fear in them, through these lockdown drills and all of this. And I knew a kid who did the lockdown drills at school, and every time there was a drill, he just came home shaking. And it was a day and a half of fixing that, right? And so I think we forget that they've been through, I mean, I'm Gen X. We've been through a lot, right? We've been through a lot. We have been through nothing like what these younger generations have. I did duck and cover under a desk thinking that was going to save me from a nuclear bomb. They're worried about dying in their classroom.
Yeah, of course.
And that's huge. And I think that plays a lot in it, and also plays into their searching, right? Because I could die any day. So what is it that's going to give me something to hold on to if I now know I could die any day?
Yeah.
And so it's a lot. And I think, I think all denominations kind of forget that. We forget that these kids have had it so rough and they're still struggling. They're still, we would go to the UCF market days and I talked to all kinds of students who were like, oh, this sounds great. I'd love to come. I don't have a car. And we're on the edge of the campus, sort of, because we sat there and said, well, let's pull it up on Google Maps. And from where we were by the library, it was a 38-minute walk to our congregation. And I'm like, nobody's gonna do that. Not in the summer.
Yeah.
Summer. I like to walk from my car into the church in the summer. So, it's one of those things that we as a denomination are still thinking in the old ways of doing things, that everybody will come to church if you just ask them, right? But there's other things. And that's where that, the third place of maybe shifting, because if you could have, my dream, if I was going to plant churches, was get a place like in a strip mall where there's a laundromat and a coffee shop and a movie theater, and be there and offer meals and offer, we're going to do potluck 2-3 nights a week. We're going to do, and you bring what you can. And if you can't, we'll make it, we'll figure it out. Right. That's, that's the kind of the original church model too. If you go back,
just thinking that. I was
right?
just thinking, it sounds
You gotta
like
be where people are and feed them, and, because people can't hear your message if they're starving. People can't hear your message if they don't think they can make rent that week. If it's a choice between coming to church and door dashing to hopefully make some money, you're going to make some money and not come to church. And we, those of us who have lived that life understand it. But if you've never had to deal with that, you don't understand it. It's just like, well, why don't they get a better job? Well, I would look at jobs and they're paying crap. So,
because I'm just thinking along those lines, and I promise this is the last email. I will not speak again. But now that we're talking about this, is there a lesson perhaps, and this is from people now who all of us have been, I've been in Florida for a while now. I come from the Northeast, but I know enough about the culture here now, and you obviously are really from here, and Miguel's been here for a long time. If we look at the traditional Black churches in the South, it sounds to me like those are places that do meet those or have traditionally met those kinds of, because they've had to, right? And they've spoken to those needs and met those needs much more perhaps than traditional, mainline Protestant churches and even Catholic, Catholic churches and things like that. Am I wrong about that?
No, I think the African American churches are doing really well because of that, because
Yeah.
it's always about tending to the needs of one another.
Yeah.
And, in a very practical way. It's,
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's something that we don't always do, in a way of, it's like, if in, my understanding, and especially because our school up here is both United Methodist, but has a lot, is a United Methodist school that has a lot of AME students.
Yeah.
And so I got to experience
Did you?
that in
Wow.
chapel and everything. And it was beautiful. And it was, in talking with my friends who are AME ministers, they're like, oh, well, sister so-and-so needs this. And it's brother, everybody's called brother and sister, right? Because it's a family, like that's a sense here. It's the family, and we take care of one another through anything. And it's, oh, if somebody's got this issue, well, there's already phone calls happening of, hey, they, money's tight this week. They're going to need a food train. They're going to need something.
Yeah.
And I think we, in our very staunch Western ideals of what, Puritans, right? Because Unitarians came into the Puritan movement. We are very still much like the Puritans in some of our ways we do things.
Yeah.
And with that, it's a very much pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If you have a need, well, what happened? If you're sick, we'll bring you food. If you had a baby, we'll bring you food.
Yep.
If you just owe money for food, well, that's not our problem, right? And that's going to be what's going to be the detriment. We have to form spaces that are caring about one another and caring about them after Sunday morning finishes. The church used to be a place where even if you weren't there every day, you knew that they were there for you every day. And we're not like that anymore. And that's across a lot of denominations. And I think that's part of the detriment and that's why church is no longer going to be a third place. And there's other people who have said that. I read an article on that the other day about church is no longer the third place. And I was like, oh, they're right. It's not. And so how do we then work through that? And how do we meet needs? And because to me, if you're just getting together to talk to one another on Sunday and to hang out and sing some songs, that's a social club. And I'm not here to be a social club, part of a social club. I won't. I am called to be a minister. I have had a calling since I was a teenager. It is who I am. And in that, my job is not to tell you what to do, because I can't, but to help guide you and walk with you in the journey and make sure that we're taking as many people as we can with us who need us. And for however long they journey with us, and for what, even if that's just, they just come for meals. Okay. They just come for meals. Now we're a touch point for them. And they're less likely to have other issues because now they have a touch point. So, and that comes out of my Assemblies of God school, time, because that was very much if you had an issue, you called the women's group, whoo, it was all taken care of. When I was in youth group there, my, money was tight for us and we didn't talk about it because my parents just were not like that. But my mom had cancer too. And so that was known. And so my youth pastor, after we delivered all the Thanksgiving boxes, gave me one, but not in front of everybody, so that I could still maintain that sense of I'm just like you, but gave my family a Thanksgiving box because he knew, and he knew that my parents wouldn't ask, and he knew that I wasn't allowed to ask, but he knew that we had issues and that money was tight. And so he wanted to make sure we ate. And then he gave me an excuse to tell my parents. And he's like, just tell them we miscounted, we had an extra. And so you get to take it home. And, it was very lovely. And I've always, if I think back to where did I feel the most belonging? It was in the Assemblies of God. And that's why I miss it. And I was in a mega church. I mean, my youth group was 250 people. So, it was even in that mass. I mean, I didn't feel it in the main church because I was still youth, right? So I was still sequestered over here. But I knew I could call my youth pastor day or night if there was a problem. And if I couldn't get a hold of him, I knew here's the list of the other people to call. And I don't always feel that anymore. And that's sad.
It's, so I guess philosophically, if you want to put it that way, your sympathies drifted toward Unitarian Universalism, but the the emotional, visceral sort of dimension of it, religion, of spiritual experience, there's still a lot of benefits to what your sort of Christian origins taught you, I guess. So I guess maybe that's what the mainline Protestant churches have to learn, I guess.
Yeah, and figuring out, I always joke with people, I'm like, if you go to our General Assemblies, worship is off the chain. Like, it is amazing. There's music for a while. We're all singing, thousands of people all together. It's great. I said, and then we come back to our regular congregations and we're still using the same order of service the Puritans used and that the Unitarians used in 1906.
Yeah.
So tell me why this is going to be something anybody under the age of 30 wants to come to. And I pulled them up because I was doing research and I got a hold of the digital archives of orders of service from 1800s, 1900s, and I was like, so other than the removal of prayer and the doxology, it's still the same. And but then you compare it to other things that we do in larger spaces. And I'm like, why can't, yes, okay, we don't all have the same musical gifts. Fine, but there are other ways to bring that out that I don't know yet how exactly, but there has to be a way to get that back. And I know we can do it in our denomination because we do it at the denominational level. And, ministers' gatherings for the whole ministry, all of the ministers, when they all gather, are also the same way. Very emotional, very spiritual. And then, and so it's this weird shift.
Yeah.
It's like, I almost feel back at home, but then it's not. And, I'd come up here and I'd have AME style services and feel at home. And, but then when the Methodists were doing this chapel service, then it was very much, here's our 5-verse hymn that we're going to sing like a funeral dirge. And this is what makes all of us happy.
Right.
And I'm like, no, it's not. Let them get back on the piano. Let's have, chapel go over time. Like, that's fine. Let's do that. And so, yeah, the emotional sense is still there in that realm. I just can't get past the theology and it'd make my head explode if I sat through a service. So
yeah, I can see that. That's fine. Okay, Miguel, you go ahead. I didn't want to. I promised I'd stop.
That's okay. I just have 32 questions left. Actually, this definitely should continue. We are past the hour mark, but I do have one question left, and then hopefully we can pick this up at a future date, future date again. It's because there's just so much more to ask. I've learned so much just in this. I've been Rich. I've been going to that Unitarian Universalist church and university, near university. For about almost 10 years, I would say. Wow. And I think I learned so much now in this hour that we had that I didn't know about Unitarian, Unitarian Universalism. Then in those 10 years, which is great. This was just a wonderful conversation.
It was, yes.
But my last question for you, Reverend Dr. Tracie, is what's next for you? Where to from here? Because I know you have just a few months left at our congregation. So where to next?
So typically for ministers, if they work full-time, after 7 years, they get what's called a sabbatical. And it's usually funded by their congregation, and they take off for 6 months to a year and go do something to find whatever they need spiritually. A lot of my colleagues will travel and all that. I have only worked part-time, and so I don't have that fund. So I joke that I am taking a self-funded sabbatical this next year, at least this next year, maybe longer, where I want to go get what I call a regular job. It is, not just, not ministry focused. Somewhere where I can just punch in, punch out, not take things home, not be worrying about everybody all the time, and picking up little bits for sermons and all. I just want to let my heart and my brain take a break. And it's a year of discernment for me. I've had this weird 7-year cycle in my life where I did 7 years working in broadcast television. I did 7 years as a crochet designer and teacher, and now I'm at my 7-year mark of ministry. And I just finished my doctorate. So it's like, okay, what's next? when I did my project for my doctorate, I found that I really liked teaching again. And it was, it was adult teaching's different than little kid teaching, which is what I had done in the past. I taught second grade, and not my gig.
Yeah.
Mad props to teachers, because I cannot do that. But teaching adults and young adults, I was like, oh, and I also discerned over this last year that my original calling was for youth ministry, and I still want to do something in that realm, right? And so, but that's harder to do. We don't typically have like paid youth ministers, like some denominations will have, okay, you have the pastor and you have the youth pastor. We don't do that as much. And so unless you're in a large congregation that can afford a full-time youth minister, you don't have that happening. And so I want to do some volunteering. I'm now set up as a volunteer for Equality Florida. One of the very well-known members of Equality Florida was like, oh, you're finishing up at the church? We should talk. And I'm like, okay, that might be where I go. I don't know yet. But I want to do some work with like Zebra Youth and those types of things, and find ways to minister through volunteering, which I don't always have time to do, and kind of be out in the community and see what the community needs are. One of the things that we're discerning, my husband and I, is moving to Chicago, because I cannot take another Florida summer. It was ridiculous last year, and that's it. My dream school is University of Chicago, because their theological program is amazing. And so I'm walking tomorrow. Actually, I received my diploma back in December, but I'm walking tomorrow for my doctorate of ministry, which is a doctorate, it's a terminal degree, but it doesn't always get you in for teaching in college, right? So I'm like, well, I could go get a PhD, because, I said, well, all I want to do is I just want to be paid to write and read and research. Like, that's what I want to do. And that's when a friend said, well, that's what a PhD program is like. And then you work as a professor, like you read and you research. And I'm like, yeah, let me do that. That sounds fun. So we don't know. We are geographically bound in Florida for a while, because my mother-in-law lives there, and we help take care of her and all that. We don't want to leave her. She will not leave Florida. We've asked. So it's a matter of waiting until she leaves this earthly coil before we can move to Chicago. That could be anytime between next week and 10 years from now, according to her doctor. So we don't know when that will happen. But that's kind of what I'm discerning is, do I wait to go to University of Chicago? There's a couple other schools that are interested, and one that came to me and asked me if I wanted to come to school with them. And I was like, well, yeah, that's kind of cool. But it's also another long distance thing that I did for seminary and for the doctorate. And I kind of want to be in class with people, because again, community is important to me. And so that may be a path. So yeah, so it's a time of discernment this next year or so, and figuring out how best to answer the call that I feel I have in ministering to people, because I realize that, again, it's not within the four walls all the time. And, I'm kind of over the content producing, it's just, there needs to be more, and I'm kind of stuck in what I can offer right now. So yeah, so that's kind of what's next. It's a whole lot of, I don't know yet, which is, both terrifying and fun, because it's a chance to kind of dream and go, okay, well, what will I make of this? What could I do? If money is no object, I would do this, and but I got to get enough to pay bills and provide insurance. And so I've got to find a job that's sustainable, which is also not easy. Again, the job market there's positions where they're like, oh yeah, we want a bachelor's degree and you're going to be doing all these high level things, and we're going to pay you $16 an hour.
Yeah.
And they've already said you can't live on that in Central Florida. And so, that's going to be a challenge, but I know the right positions out there. Again, this is where I just kind of trust the universe, and people look at me like I'm crazy. But I say, but everything's worked out so far. Every time I've needed a position, it's opened up. Every time I've thought about going back to school, it's been a clean ride to get there. So
yeah.
I'm kind of trying to trust, and still looking at job postings and going, oh, but hoping to find something. But yeah, so that's going to be a lot of discernment. I want to have some time to read, and I want to have time to, go out with friends and just do normal adult stuff, I guess.
Absolutely. Yes, you deserve it.
Yeah,
Definitely. And I want to congratulate you again
thank
for
you.
Yes.
that. It's a wonderful achievement. It's all the best. I hope you have a great day tomorrow.
Yeah,
And this
I'm looking forward
weekend,
to it. It'll be fun. We go tonight to my mentor's house for a party, and then tomorrow all day graduation stuff.
fantastic.
So
It's great. Yeah.
yeah.
awesome, awesome. So we'll have to end it here, folks, but there'll be more to come, so stay tuned. We thank the Reverend Dr. Tracie Barrett for joining us. And we have, again, thank you, Dr. Richard Grego and Dr. Aravinda Mahapatra. We miss you. We'll see you again soon. And I'm Miguel Rodriguez for Infinite Discoveries. So if you like this conversation, please like and subscribe on YouTube. And also check out our website at infinitediscoveries.org. O-R-G. Have a good one, everybody. Remember, do you have your ID?
Mhm.
Take care.